It was a cold and eerie night when the small town of Riverton was shaken by an unspeakable crime. The case was chilling, leaving everyone in the community on edge. But what happened next, no one could have ever expected. The police, stumped by the mysterious disappearance of a local family, were ready to close the case, believing the answers to be lost forever. That's when something inexplicable happened. A black cat, seemingly out of nowhere, stepped forward and led them to a discovery that would terrify even the bravest among them. The cat wasn't just an ordinary animal. There was something unsettling about its eyes, glowing in the darkness, as it guided Detective Sarah Miller and her team down a winding, forgotten alley. With every step they took, the air grew colder, the tension mounting as if something malevolent was waiting for them in the shadows. As the detective followed the feline's lead, she couldn't help but feel a creeping sensation that they were being drawn into a truth that no one was prepared to face. What the police discovered in that hidden room behind an abandoned building would leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about the town. And that cat? Well, it wasn't done yet. It had brought them here for a reason. The truth was far darker than anyone had ever imagined. Something sinister was lurking in Riverton, and the cat was only the beginning. This isn't just another animal-led mystery. What you're about to hear is a chilling tale of deception, fear, and a hidden truth that will haunt you long after the story ends. Keep watching, because the revelation you're about to witness will terrify you in ways you never thought possible. The night air was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the distant sound of the wind rustling through the trees. Detective Sarah Miller stood at the entrance of the old alleyway, her breath visible in the cold night air. She glanced at her colleagues, who stood beside her, hesitant, yet compelled to follow. They were on the edge of Riverton, the quiet town that had always felt safe until now. The case of the missing family had left everyone on edge, but this was something else entirely. The cat, with its gleaming eyes, stood motionless at the alley's entrance, as if waiting for them to make the first move. Its dark fur blended seamlessly with the shadows, and its unblinking stare sent a chill crawling up Sarah's spine. Something about the way it stood there, not a single movement or sound, felt wrong. It wasn't just a stray, it was as if it knew something they didn't. Sarah could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing in on her, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. The alley was narrow, flanked by tall, crumbling buildings that seemed to watch them with empty eyes. The faint scent of mildew and decay hung in the air, mixing with the sharp tang of rust from the metal debris scattered across the ground. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, but there was no time to second guess. The cat had led them this far. "Do you think it's safe?" one of her colleagues whispered, his voice barely audible in the suffocating silence. Sarah didn't respond. She was lost in the eerie stillness of the night, her heart pounding as she took a tentative step forward, her eyes never leaving the cat. Each step she took echoed in the alley, as though the world around her was holding its breath. What were they about to uncover? And why had the cat led them here? The dread that had slowly been building inside her now coiled tightly in her chest. This wasn't just a mystery, it was something darker, something evil, and they were about to walk right into it. Detective Sarah Miller wasn't the type of person who let fear control her. She had been a detective for over a decade, solving cases that others had long given up on. But this one was different. This was personal. The disappearance of the Walker family had shaken the small town of Riverton to its core. A father, mother, and 2 children, gone without a trace. No ransom note, no clues, nothing but a cold, empty house and a town filled with whispers. But what bothered Sarah the most wasn't just the case. It was the nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach, something that had been growing ever since she first stepped into that empty house. Sarah had always been a driven, focused individual. Growing up in the chaotic, crime-ridden city of New York, she learned early that the world didn't always make sense. People did awful things to each other, and the only way to find order was to sift through the chaos, piece by piece, until the truth revealed itself. That was her life, her purpose. And it was why she'd moved to Riverton a year ago, a small town where she hoped to escape the relentless noise and find peace. But peace had proved elusive. The more time she spent in Rivorton, the more she felt something dark beneath its tranquil surface. Her colleagues often teased her about her need for solitude. Sarah wasn't a people person. She didn't do well with small talk or meaningless chatter. Her focus was always on the job. Her stern exterior masked the deep well of empathy she carried, especially for the victims she encountered. The Walker family had been the latest in a long line of missing persons cases that haunted her dreams. The worst part was the uncertainty of it all, the not knowing. For Sarah, there was no peace until the answers were found. It was late at night when Sarah was called to the case, and the initial discovery had only fueled her obsession. The search had been fruitless for days, but something kept her going. An almost supernatural sense of purpose that made her feel like she was being led toward something bigger. Something, or someone. Her eyes drifted to the alleyway where the cat stood. It was as though it had been waiting for her, guiding her here. Her partner, Officer Jake Hansen, stood at her side. He was young, eager, and still wide-eyed about the work they did. His inexperience had shown a lot when he first started, but Sarah had taken him under her wing. He admired her, looked up to her, and he wasn't afraid to ask questions, even if they made Sarah uncomfortable. She had never liked being admired, it made her vulnerable. But she also understood that his reliance on her was the reason he'd become such a good cop. Jake wasn't as wary as Sarah, always hopeful that things would get better. But Sarah had seen enough darkness in her years as a detective to know that hope could be a dangerous thing. Hope could blind you to the truth, distract you from the real danger that lurked in the shadows. While Sarah's experience had made her a pessimist, Jake's optimism was something she couldn't help but admire. It reminded her of the person she used to be before the weight of her cases had hardened her into the quiet, relentless investigator she had become. "What do you think, Sarah?" Jake's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to face him. His eyes were wide with curiosity, but there was also an undercurrent of fear. It was clear he didn't fully understand the depth of what they were dealing with. But she couldn't blame him. This case wasn't like any other they had worked on before. Felt wrong. "I don't know, Jake," Sarah replied, her voice steady but laced with uncertainty. She turned back to the alley, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the cat's motionless presence. "But I have a feeling this is going to be one of those cases that changes everything." As they ventured deeper into the alley, Sarah's mind raced with questions. What was the cat's role in all of this? Was it just a random stray? Or was it leading them to something they weren't prepared to find? The silence was suffocating, but it was the oppressive silence of an undiscovered truth. It was the kind of silence that made Sarah's instincts flare, pushing her forward even as her heart beat faster in her chest. At the same time, the tension between her and Jake was palpable. His youthful energy was a stark contrast to her calm, measured demeanor. Jake kept glancing at her, no doubt wondering what was going through her mind. He had no idea how many times she had already lived through the worst-case scenarios, how many times she had faced the terrifying unknown. To him, this was just another case. But Sarah knew better. Behind her stoic exterior, Sarah was constantly battling with the past. A case years ago, a case she couldn't forget, had left scars deep within her. It was her failure to solve that case that still haunted her. The guilt gnawed at her every time she took on a new investigation. This time, she promised herself, it wouldn't end the same way. She wasn't going to fail again. The only problem was that this case didn't seem to play by the same rules. They were about to uncover a truth far more terrifying than either of them could have ever imagined. The rain had started falling harder now, drenching the streets of Rivorton. The small town, usually peaceful and quiet, felt suffocating. Sarah and Jake moved cautiously through the narrow alley, their steps muffled by the incessant downpour. The air was thick with tension, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Every inch of the alley seemed to close in on them, and the further they walked, the more Sarah felt like they were being watched, observed from the shadows by something unseen. The cat led them with an eerie precision, its fur soaked by the rain, yet it moved gracefully, its eyes locked on the path ahead. It didn't flinch, didn't waver. Sarah couldn't help but feel that the cat knew something they didn't. Its presence was unsettling, yet strangely familiar, like it had always been there, guiding them without a word. As they reached the end of the alley, the cat suddenly stopped. It sat motionless in front of a rusted metal door, hidden beneath a large, overgrown tree that seemed out of place in the otherwise neatly kept neighborhood. The door was old, its paint chipped and faded, its hinges rusted. The darkness beyond it seemed to swallow the light from their flashlights. "Do you think it wants us to go inside?" Jake asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. He was visibly unnerved, and Sarah could see that his optimism was starting to falter. The unease in the air was palpable. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was studying the door, her mind racing with possibilities. She had been a detective long enough to understand the significance of a moment like this. She couldn't ignore the sense of dread that gnawed at her insides. Yet, there was something in the cat's unblinking stare that kept her rooted to the spot. The feline had guided them here for a reason. Taking a deep breath, Sarah motioned for Jake to stay back and approached the door. She placed her hand on the cool, rusty metal, feeling the sharp sting of the rain. The cat didn't move, but its eyes never left her. The door creaked as Sarah slowly pushed it open, the sound slicing through the heavy silence like a warning. Inside was an old basement, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb that hung from the ceiling. The air smelled musty, thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something metallic, something more sinister. As Sarah stepped inside, her flashlight illuminated the stone walls, damp and cracked. A chill ran down her spine, and she hesitated. The atmosphere felt wrong, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jake reluctantly followed her inside, his voice shaky. "I don't know about this, Sarah. Something's not right here." "I know," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the unsettling sensations that gripped her. "But we've come this far. We need to see it through." They moved cautiously, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, forgotten boxes, and an assortment of broken household items. Nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary, except for the large metal chest at the far end of the room. It sat in the corner, half hidden beneath a torn, faded rug. The chest's presence felt out of place in the otherwise abandoned space, as if it had been deliberately concealed. The cat had already positioned itself beside the chest, its gaze fixed on it with an almost knowing intensity. Sarah felt a wave of dread wash over her. She was certain that this was the moment they had been waiting for. The cat had led them here, and the chest, with its tarnished surface and strange aura, was the key to unlocking the mystery of the Walker family's disappearance. Without a word, Sarah approached the chest, her pulse quickening with every step. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the latch, but she forced herself to remain calm. She wasn't about to let fear take control. With a sharp tug, the latch gave way, and she slowly lifted the heavy lid. Inside was a tangle of what looked like old photographs, dusty journals, and scraps of paper. At the top of the pile, however, was something far more shocking. What appeared to be the Walker family's personal items. A gold locket, a small, leather-bound diary, and a torn photograph of the family taken just months before they had vanished. The image seemed almost too perfect, too happy. A sharp contrast to the cold emptiness that surrounded them now. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she picked up the diary. It was well worn, its edges frayed, as if it had been read and handled countless times. She flipped it open, her heart racing as she read the first few lines. "The cat knows. It has always known. We should never have listened to it. It warned us, but we didn't understand. Now it's too late." Sarah's stomach churned. The words were cryptic, terrifying, and offered no answers, only more questions. What cat? What had the Walker family been involved in? Why did they leave behind these warnings, as if they had anticipated something terrible? Before she could process what she had read, the sound of movement behind her made her freeze. Jake was standing a few feet away, holding something in his hand. He looked pale, his face ashen. "Sarah." Jake's voice cracked as he held up a piece of paper. "I found this in the other room." "It's a map." Sarah turned to him, her mind racing. A map? What could it lead to? Why was it hidden here in the basement, next to the Walker family's things? She stepped over to Jake, taking the map from his hands. The map was old, weathered by time, with markings that seemed to correspond to various locations in Rivorton. But there was one spot marked with an eerie, jagged red X, the very spot they were standing in. The cat's presence suddenly made sense in a way that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. This was no ordinary cat. It had been here before, watching, waiting. It knew the truth. Suddenly, the basement felt smaller, more suffocating. The walls seemed to close in on them as the reality of their discovery set in. Something was terribly wrong. They weren't just investigating a missing persons case anymore. They were uncovering something far more sinister, something that had been hidden in plain sight. "I think we found more than we bargained for," Sarah said softly, her voice tinged with both fear and determination. "We need to get out of here. We're not alone." Jake nodded, his face pale as he quickly glanced around. But before they could make their way toward the door, the cat let out a low, guttural growl. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, and Sarah could feel the temperature in the room drop. There was no doubt now. They were in danger. The realization hit them both at once. The truth they had been chasing had led them to a dark, hidden place, and it was clear that something or someone was determined to keep them from uncovering it. As Sarah and Jake stood frozen, a figure stepped out of the shadows, and the world as they knew it began to crumble around them. The air in the basement grew heavier, suffocating, as Sarah and Jake stood motionless. The flashlight beam flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally, as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards beneath their feet echoed louder in the oppressive silence, and the sound of the rain pounding against the roof only heightened the feeling of isolation. The only other sound was the low, menacing growl of the cat, its eyes never leaving them, as if warning them that they had ventured too far into something they were not meant to understand. "Sarah, I don't like this. We should go," Jake whispered urgently, his voice trembling. His usual bravado had disappeared, replaced by a palpable fear. He was looking over his shoulder now, glancing around the room as if expecting something or someone to emerge from the shadows at any moment. Sarah, however, stood still, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something monumental, something that had been buried for far too long. But there was something else, something darker, that made her stomach turn. "I know," she whispered back, her voice steady, though the weight of her own fear threatened to break through. "But we're so close. We can't back down now." Jake let out a nervous laugh, but it sounded hollow, empty. "Close to what? Whatever this is, it's not worth it, Sarah. That cat, it's not normal. It's been leading us here for a reason. But we don't know what that reason is." Sarah turned to face Jake, her expression hardening. She had seen a lot in her years as a detective, but this was something different, something she couldn't yet comprehend. She felt as though they were standing at the edge of a cliff, about to plunge into an abyss of truth they weren't ready for. And yet, she couldn't turn away. "We can't stop now, Jake," she said quietly, her voice carrying a quiet determination. "If we leave now, we'll never know the truth. And whatever happened to the Walkers, it's bigger than we think." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. The cat's growl intensified, a deep rumble that vibrated through Sarah's bones. She felt her heartbeat quicken, an unease gnawing at her from the inside out. There was something profoundly unsettling about the cat's behavior, something that told her it wasn't just a stray animal guiding them through the mystery, but something far more sinister. "Do you hear that?" Jake whispered, his voice strained as he leaned closer to Sarah. She stood perfectly still, straining her ears to catch the sound. At first, there was nothing but the constant rush of the rain against the roof. But then, faintly, she heard it. A soft scraping sound, like claws dragging against concrete. It came from the corner of the room, where the darkness seemed to deepen. "Jake," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "don't move. Don't make a sound." Her pulse raced in her ears as she focused on the noise. It was rhythmic, deliberate, closer, slowly, as if the shadows themselves were alive, something stirred in the corner. The scraping sound grew louder, followed by a soft rustling. Sarah's eyes flicked to Jake, his face pale with terror. He didn't move, didn't even breathe. The room had gone completely still, save for the ominous scraping. Sarah's mind raced. What was causing the sound? Was it another animal or something more human? She couldn't help but feel like they were no longer alone in the basement. Without warning, the cat let out a loud, shrill hiss, its body tensing as it crouched low to the ground. Its fur stood on end, and its eyes burned with an intensity that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. The tension in the room was palpable, like a wire stretched too tight, ready to snap. And then the scraping stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah took a slow, cautious step forward, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every creak of the floor beneath her felt like it echoed through the room, louder than it should have been. She moved toward the source of the sound, her hand gripping her flashlight tightly. Each step felt like a lifetime, the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighing heavily on her. Suddenly, a voice shattered the silence. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Sarah froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. The voice was low, gravelly, and came from somewhere behind her. Jake's eyes widened in terror as he looked around the room, but there was no sign of anyone. "Who's there?" Sarah demanded, her voice steady, but her heart pounding. She couldn't see anyone, but the voice, so close, so real, was undeniable. She felt the presence of something or someone, lurking just beyond the reach of her flashlight. "Don't turn around," the voice said, the words cold and menacing. "You won't like what you see." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The voice seemed to echo in her head, reverberating in the silence like a warning. She didn't turn around, but her eyes darted nervously toward the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, each pulse like a drumbeat of impending doom. For a moment, she thought she imagined the voice, but then she heard it again, this time clearer. "You're too deep now," it whispered. "Too deep to turn back." A chill ran through Sarah's body. The voice sounded as though it was coming from all around them, the walls closing in on them. She could almost feel the darkness pressing against her, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. "Jake," she said, her voice barely audible. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they could move, the cat let out another growl, this one much louder, much more forceful. Sarah and Jake both froze, the tension in the air palpable. The cat's fur stood on end, its body tense as it stared directly into the shadows. Something shifted in the dark. A figure emerged, slowly, almost reluctantly. It was tall, dressed in dark, tattered clothing, its face obscured by a hood. The figure moved silently, effortlessly, like a shadow itself, its presence more felt than seen. It was not human, but something else, something Sarah couldn't quite define. The cat's growl grew louder, more insistent. The figure didn't flinch, didn't stop. It kept moving toward them, its footsteps quiet but deliberate. Sarah's heart raced. This was no longer a simple investigation. This was something far darker, far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. She turned to Jake, her voice shaking. "We need to get out of here. Now." But the door, the one they had entered through, was no longer there. The figure was blocking their only exit. "You shouldn't have come," the voice whispered again, a final warning before everything went black. The room seemed to shrink around Sarah and Jake, the walls pressing in as the figure approached, its presence casting an inescapable darkness. The cat, still hissing and growling from the shadows, was their only lifeline in this terrifying moment. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as her mind raced. What was this figure? Who or what had been guiding them all along? The air felt thick, charged with an unseen energy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. The figure, cloaked in shadow, continued its slow approach, moving with a fluidity that was unnerving. Its face remained hidden beneath the dark hood, but Sarah could feel its gaze upon them, cold and calculating. The growl of the cat was almost deafening now, an unmistakable warning that they were too deep in this nightmare to turn back. "What do you want from us?" Jake's voice broke through the tension, desperation lacing his words. His hand gripped Sarah's arm, his fear palpable. He had always been the more skeptical one, the logical thinker, but in that moment, his doubt had crumbled, and the terror was consuming him. The figure didn't respond immediately. Instead, it stopped just a few feet away from them, its presence nearly suffocating. Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of dread as her mind raced to comprehend the situation. The house was alive with secrets, each corner hiding a mystery that only the cat seemed to understand. And now, this figure, this entity, was the final piece of the puzzle. "Why are you doing this?" Sarah demanded again, trying to keep her voice steady. She took a tentative step forward, her flashlight shaking in her hand. She knew this was the moment where everything would either be explained or spiral into chaos. "Who are you?" The figure's voice was soft, but it cut through the air like a knife. "Who am I?" it repeated, as if the question itself were a riddle. "I am the one who has waited for the truth to be unearthed. I am the keeper of secrets, and the one who has bound this place to its past. But you, Sarah, you should not have come." Sarah felt her breath catch. It knew her name. Her mind reeled. How could this figure know who she was? Who else had known she was coming? The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture was still too distorted to understand. She looked over at Jake, whose wide eyes were filled with terror. He was frozen, unable to speak, unable to move. The fear had paralyzed him, leaving Sarah to face whatever lay ahead. The cat's growl intensified, more frantic now. It darted out from the shadows, its fur bristling, and sprang towards the figure, its claws extended. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it reached out with one long, pale hand, effortlessly swatting the cat aside like it was nothing more than a nuisance. The cat tumbled across the floor, landing in a heap but immediately recovering, hissing and arching its back in defiance. It wasn't finished yet. The figure's lips curled into something resembling a smile, though it was devoid of warmth. "You see, Sarah," it continued, its voice like a whisper in the dark, "I am bound to this place, to its history, its sins, and the cat. The cat has been my guide. But now it is your turn." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, and a sickening realization washed over her. The cat had not just been leading them, it had been guiding them towards something far more sinister, something ancient, something that had waited for years to be uncovered. She struggled to hold onto her composure. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. "What are you hiding?" The figure took a step closer, its shadow swallowing the light from the flashlight, and for a moment, the room seemed to darken further. The air grew colder, the temperature plummeting to an unbearable chill. "The truth," it murmured, "is always darker than you can imagine." The cat, still crouching low, darted forward again. But this time, it did not attack the figure. Instead, it moved towards Sarah, circling her legs, mewing softly as though trying to communicate something. Sarah reached down instinctively, her fingers brushing against the cat's soft fur. And as her skin made contact, a jolt of energy shot through her. It was as if the cat's presence connected her to something outside herself, something larger than the room, than the figure in front of them. In that moment, memories, faint, fragmented, began to surface. A vision, a blur of images. The house, the cat, and people long forgotten, their faces twisted in anguish. She saw a young girl, lost and afraid, wandering through the dark halls of the house. The girl's eyes met Sarah's in that fleeting vision, her face full of terror as the cat followed her steps. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "No," Sarah whispered, taking a step back, her hand clutching her chest. The realization hit her with crushing force. The figure watched her intently, its eyes hidden beneath the hood, but its presence piercing through her. "You see now, don't you?" it asked. "The cat has led you to the truth. The girl was you, Sarah. You were lost in this house years ago, and the secrets you uncovered, they were meant to stay buried." The room seemed to spin as Sarah's mind processed the words. She had been the one to go missing. She had been the lost child in this house. But how? She couldn't remember. The memories were locked away, buried in a part of her mind that she had long since abandoned. The weight of the truth was too much to bear, yet here it was, undeniable. The figure continued, its voice cold and detached. The cat has been waiting for you to remember, to finish what was started. It is not just a guide, it is a protector. And it is your only ally now. The cat mewed again, more urgently this time, as if urging Sarah to take the next step. She looked down at it, and for the first time she understood. The cat had been with her through everything, guiding her, protecting her, reminding her of something buried deep inside. The figure let out a soft chuckle, its head tilting to one side. But it's too late, Sarah. You cannot change what happened. You are already part of this house's history, and so is the cat. With those words, the room seemed to shift, the air growing thick with an unholy energy. Sarah knew what she had to do, though it was the last thing she wanted. She stepped forward, drawing strength from the cat at her feet. The only way to end this, to break the cycle, was to face the past. I'm not running from this anymore, she said, her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her heart. I will uncover the truth, whatever it takes. The figure let out a low growl, its form flickering like a shadow in the fading light. You cannot win. Not against me. But Sarah didn't falter. With the cat by her side, she knew what had to be done. The final confrontation had begun, and nothing would stop her from uncovering the darkness that had haunted her, and this house, for so long. As the figure lunged at her, the cat leapt into action, its claws striking with deadly precision. The figure staggered back, its form shifting, weakening. Sarah seized the moment. With a surge of adrenaline, she rushed forward, determined to end the nightmare once and for all. The cat, her protector, had shown her the way. It was time to bring the truth into the light. As the dust settled in the old house, Sarah stood at the threshold, her breath still shallow and her heart beating with the echo of everything that had transpired. The figure was gone, its darkness dissipating with the last of the shadows that had haunted the house for so long. The cat, now calm and still by her side, seemed to breathe with the house itself, as if they shared a quiet understanding. The weight that had burdened her for so long, the confusion, the fear, was finally lifting, but the truth she had uncovered was heavy. She gazed around the now silent house, its secrets laid bare. The memories that had once eluded her, the terror she had buried deep in her mind, were no longer locked away. Everything had been tied together. The lost child, the mysterious figure, the house that had witnessed it all. And in confronting the truth, she had freed herself from the chains that bound her. But the cost had been high. There was no going back to the life she had known before, no unseeing the things she had learned. Her eyes shifted to the cat, who still sat loyally at her feet, its amber eyes gleaming with a strange sense of knowing. It had been her guide, her protector, in a way she could never have imagined. Without it, she would never have found her way through the darkness. It had always been there, patiently watching, waiting for the moment when she was ready to understand the truth. Sarah's gaze softened as she knelt down, stroking the cat's fur with a tenderness that reflected her newfound sense of peace. I never would have made it through without you, she whispered, the words carrying the weight of gratitude, of an unspoken bond formed in the midst of chaos. The cat's purring was the only answer, but it was enough. Sarah took one last look at the house, its eerie silence now seeming less like a threat and more like a long-awaited peace. She had faced the darkness head-on, and in doing so, she had learned that truth, no matter how terrifying, always finds a way to the surface. There was no escaping the past, no burying the truth. But sometimes it took a guide, a protector, to help reveal what had been hidden. As she stepped away from the house, the memories of her journey still fresh in her mind, Sarah couldn't help but wonder, how many other dark secrets lay buried, waiting for someone brave enough to face them? And more importantly, how many others were in need of a guide like the cat to help them find their way? The house behind her was silent now, but Sarah knew its story would never truly be finished. The past, no matter how much it hurt, was a part of who she was. and in embracing it, she had found her strength. The journey had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been a reminder. The truth is never as simple as it seems, but in uncovering it, we uncover ourselves. As Sarah walked away, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope rising within her. A sense of closure, and yet, an understanding that some mysteries would always remain, lingering just out of reach. If you enjoyed this chilling journey and want to hear more terrifying tales, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to know what you think. Share your thoughts or predictions in the comments below. Did you see the twist coming? Or did it leave you speechless? And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos, because you won't want to miss what's coming next. Join our community of thrill seekers as we dive deeper into the mysteries that await. Stay tuned for more spine-tingling stories, and remember, sometimes the truth is scarier than anything we could ever imagine.